Hi, I'm Bryan Dunnewald. I'm the Assistant Organist and Choirmaster here at St. Mark's Church, Philadelphia, and we're here for a tour of the organ today. Now, I thought we'd start in the basement. We're in the undercroft of the church beneath the St. John's altar right here. And this is because we want to see where everything starts. The organ's a wind instrument, and we want to see where it gets its air. So follow me and we'll come into the blower room. Alright, so here we are in the blower room. This is it. This is the main event. This is where all the wind for the organ is gathered. All the wind for the front organ, that is, about 95% of the instrument. And this big old turbine, it has to gather enough wind to power the whole instrument as if a whole bunch of pipes were playing at once. Once it gathers the air, it draws everything into these static wind lines here. These send the air to the organ where they'll be received at the reservoirs and eventually into the pipe chest. Before we go upstairs, I wanted to show you one other blower room, much newer blower room at the west end of the church. So now we've come all the way back beneath the west doors here, and this is the blower room for the antiphonal organ. Okay, so here we are inside the antiphonal organ blower room, and you'll notice this one's a little different. It's all paved, insulated, and clean. And this right here is the blower. It's much smaller because there's only about 5% of the organ back here. Once this blower collects some air, then it's sent up through this wind line into a static reservoir. This makes sure that the pressure being sent upstairs to the antiphonal organ stays the same. Okay, so now we're upstairs where most of the action is happening. And behind me is the antiphonal organ, which we were just beneath. And now we'll swing around and look at the main organ. And now behind me is the main organ. This was built in 1937 by Aeolian-Skinner and was one of G. Donald Harrison's earliest organs. To my right is the main organ chamber, which we'll show you in great detail in just a few minutes. To my left is actually an older instrument, the screen division, which was built by Austin in 1902. And was retained when Aeolian-Skinner came in and built the new organ. So now for a little more explanation. The screen organ behind me is the oldest division in our organ. And I keep using that word. Division is like a room in the organ. The organ is made up of various rooms, and a division is a room full of pipes. And each division functions kind of like a quirky little chamber orchestra. And together, all of the divisions can come together to complete the quirky symphony orchestra, if you will. So this is our oldest division. It's very small and hard to get to, so we won't be including it on our tour. Inside the screen division is one of my very favorite stops. It's a diapason. It's absolutely wonderful, and if you hear Mass, I guarantee you hear it used all the time. Okay, so behind me is the main event of the tour. This organ visually, from this perspective, is very easy to understand. There are two chambers. The chamber to my left houses the choir and positive division, and the chamber to my right houses the great swell and pedal. And then there's a very special division which was built in the 1920s by the Wanamaker pipe shop, and it lives all the way up in the ceiling. And if you look carefully, you can see there are some panels that look just a little bit darker than their neighbors. Those panels are actually fabric, and the organ speaks through a tone chute down into those panels and to the chancel below. So, without any further ado, let's go upstairs and take a look inside. So here we are at the organ console, and most people probably think of this as the organ, as it were. But this is actually just where the organist controls the organ. And we could have a whole video about how the organ works musically and how everything here works. But we're really going to focus on the pipe chambers today. One of the most unique things about this organ is where the console is located. We are inside the organ, essentially. Above my head are the pipes of the positive division. Behind me are the pipes of the choir organ. Over here are the great and swell. And it makes listening to the organ very difficult for the organist. So we really have to record ourselves a lot and pay close attention to how things sound out there, because they don't sound the same way here. What I'll tell you today about the organ console is that the organ console is where we pull together all the resources around us. So each keyboard is generally home to one or two different divisions. Each of these knobs controls what's called a stop. The stop is basically a certain sound. Think of it as one instrument in the orchestra. And as an organist, we pull together various combinations of instruments or stops to create the sound we're desiring. It could be one stop for a beautiful solo. It could be almost every stop on the organ for the full organ effect. So I have the keys. Let's go downstairs and take a look inside the pipe chamber. Follow me. So, we're back in the outer sacristy again, and many of you have probably walked past this door and seen the words organ chamber, wonder what's behind it. Well, let's go. Alright, so I hope you watched your head coming in. This is the pedal division. It's our first stop. It's the lowest level geographically of the organ and also the lowest level musically of the organ. This is where the highest concentration of bass pipes are. Behind me are the pipes of the 32-foot reed. They're the tallest pipes in the whole organ. When you hear the triumphant end to a Magnificat or to a psalm or sometimes throughout a hymn, that's what you're hearing, are these huge pipes behind me. But here we are in a different part of the pedal division, and I want to show you this because this has a lot of the things that go on underneath the pipes. So right here are some of the big static wind lines. These are coming up from the blower, and they're serving various reservoirs. Right here, below the pipes, is one of those reservoirs. So this big old box fills with air, and then through a valve system lets a specific amount of pressure into the wind chest. The wind chest is this box beneath the pipes. And in this wind chest are the mechanisms that control whether or not a stop is on. So when you're pulling out on the console to say, I want this set of pipes to play, and whether or not the note plays. It's kind of like a cross section. So if the stop's on and the note plays, then the valve is open and the pipe sounds. Air goes up through the toe board into the pipe. If you imagine this here, if this were like a cutaway, the air would come up from the static wind line into the reservoir. The reservoir regulates the pressure, and then if the stop knob and key are pressed, then air will flow up through the chest into the pipe. And this right here is a flue pipe. There are two types of pipes, flues and reeds. Flues look like this, and reeds look like this. Flue pipes, named for their flue, think chimney flue. The air comes up through the toe, then it comes up here and vibrates over a lip and a languid, and then that creates a vacuum on either the inside or the outside of the pipe. If there's a vacuum on the inside, then the air is pulled into the pipe, and then that creates a pressure zone, so then it's pushed out. And that going back and forth creates a vibration, and that's where you get your pitch. So to give you a sense of where we are, behind me is the St. John's altar, and to my right are the choir stalls on the north side of the church. And so these pipes speak up and out into the chancel and out and into the nave directly. So behind me are the bass pipes, so that they have lots of room to grow, and then underneath the great organ, which we'll visit next, are the treble pipes of the pedal division. When I talk about 8 feet, 16 feet, 32 feet, I'm talking about the pipe length, but I'm talking about really the pitch of the pipe. The organ essentially works by enforcing various harmonics. So you know when you sing a note, when you hear a note played, you're hearing the pitch that's written on the page, but you're also hearing little harmonics above it, which are creating the timbre, the color of the sound. It's why an oboe sounds different from a clarinet, sounds different from a violin, sounds different from a soprano, sounds different from a mezzo. All singing and playing the same note sound completely differently because of the various harmonic profiles of their voice or instrument. The organ works the exact same way. So just like a clarinet enforces certain harmonics, we have various pipes that reinforce certain harmonics as well to either mimic that color or create something totally new. Behind me are the 16-foot pipes. These are the low bass pipes of the organ. They're like the bass section of the orchestra. They play an octave below everything else, and even though it's a pedal division, we also have treble pipes. These are our pedal treble ranks. A rank of pipes is essentially a row of pipes, and if you look down here, you can see that these pipes are laid into neat rows. Think rank and file. So single file line means you're standing one behind the other. A rank means you're standing one next to each other. So here's one rank of pipes, two ranks of pipes, three ranks of pipes, etc. We use ranks because it describes fairly accurately the size of the organ. This organ has about 115 ranks, which is a large instrument. Alright, so here we are back upstairs at the organ console, and funny enough, again another quirk of this organ is that this is how we access the rest of the pipe chamber. So come on back and let's look at the lower grate and swell. Here we are. Alright, so here we are in the lower grate and swell. Now if you remember from earlier, we are in the main chamber. This is the one to the left if you're looking at the main organ case. And this houses the lower grate and lower swell. This organ is big enough that we need two different levels to house two divisions. Usually you could just have one level and there'd be the grate and the swell. Here's the grate. This is the lower grate, which houses most of the bigger or medium-sized pipes of the grate. And you'll notice if you look out here past the facade, those are the display pipes, you can see into the church. It's a very nice view. And here are our 8-foot and 4-foot pipes. Let's talk a little bit about the different types of pipes. So you notice they're all different shapes and sizes. The shape of the pipe is one of the main ways the pipe gets its characteristic sound. This is a principal, and this is kind of the standard looking organ pipe. You know, if you were to Google organ pipe, what does it look like? This is it. Its proportions and construction are a certain way that produces a principal sound. And principal is the first type of organ stop, and it's also distinctly organ. It's the only one that's not really mimicking an orchestra instrument. When you think of the organ sound, like Here Comes the Bride, this is that pipe. Now, compare that with this guy here. But you notice the pipe on the left is the principal we just saw. It's skinnier. The pipe on the right is fatter. It's a flute. Flutes are fat. It's an easy way to remember it, okay? This is a Borden. It's a capped flute, which means that it sounds an octave lower than it looks. The cap and the shape of the pipe all make this sound that mimics a flute, but is also fundamental heavy, meaning that there's not a bunch of overtones, you don't hear much buzz, it's not very bright, whereas the principal has a little bit more energy in it. It sounds a little bit closer to a string. Now, here's a string pipe. You notice here's the principal, here's a string. Skinny strings. Strings are skinny. Easy. The string creates a thinner sound. More buzz, less hootiness. One more important feature of this organ, a very critical feature of this organ, are these right here. These are the swell shades, and these control our dynamics in a very literal way. Singers and instrumentalists can play their instrument quietly. We can't play the organ quietly on a pipe-by-pipe, rank-by-rank basis. So what we essentially have to do is close the doors on the room in which there are pipes. Certain divisions in the organ, or rooms of pipes, are enclosed and other ones are not. If a division is unenclosed, that means that it speaks freely into the room. So the grate division, which is over here, speaks directly into the room. There's nothing to control the literal volume of that division. On the other hand, the swell division has these swell shades which open and close like this, and that controls how much sound gets out. And because the organ uses this technique to control volume, we can get some very distinctive effects. The most notable is the sound of lots and lots of pipes on at once, so a big sound, like think full orchestra with brass, that's quiet. So if these shades are closed, it's kind of like putting until I open it, and changes the timbre of my speech. It also changes the volume. Same thing here. This is a wonderful effect. People call it all kinds of different things. Usually they're extra musical metaphors. I think of storm clouds rolling in, and before the thunder clap happens, and our choirmaster Robert always calls it the bacon's sizzling. That's this effect. So when we close these, everything gets quieter, and we can control that on the organ console. So let's go inside the swell. Okay, so here we are in the lower swell, and the swell division is not so much like the grate where we have bigger pipes, smaller pipes. The swell is pretty evenly split. Behind me here are the swell reeds, and then behind these are some of our lovely string stops and flutes and principals. This division is very poorly lit. We need extra lights, so we're not going to film as much in here. Okay, so let's leave the lower swell and grate and go around the corner to the choir and positive. Alright, so here we are. We're entering the choir bombard division, and then we'll eventually be going upstairs. So follow me inside and let's take a look. So here we are in the choir organ. This is home to some of our loud stops in the bombard division, and also home to the very softest stops in the whole organ. Some of my absolute favorites. The bombard division is on my left, the choir is on the right. They're all enclosed in the same box. Here are the swell shades. The bombard division is made up of 3 different reed pipes. Reeds are essentially mimicking brass and winds. So let's take a look inside one of the pipes. You can start. Inside the reed pipe, this is the boot, and the air comes up through this toe hole into the boot, and it vibrates a teeny little reed right here. You can see that brass reed. The big tube beneath it, where my finger is called the shallot. That's the thing that the reed vibrates against. And then this right here is called a tuning slide. When we adjust the tuning of the reed with the slide, it basically just clamps the reed down and changes its length a little bit. This also changes the sound of the reed. The way to tune this pipe without changing its timbre is to adjust this little scroll here. You can move it up and down very carefully, and it will change the pitch or length of the pipe. Because you see, the pipe is this tall, but really it's only this tall, because this is where the air can first escape. So this is the length of this, what we call a resonator. Now on a reed pipe, the shape of the resonator, see this one is conical, affects its tone. The curvature of the reed itself, that tiny little brass flap, affects its tone. The shape of the shallot, meaning the surface area on which the reed can vibrate, changes its tone, and the length of the reed changes its tone. So there's a lot of different factors and ways to voice. Changing the timbre of a pipe is called voicing, to voice this pipe. So again, air comes up through here, vibrates against a reed, which is then amplified through this resonator. So here we have 2 different reed pipes, and this is a great example of how their shape impacts their sound. The pipe on the right is a clarinet pipe. This pipe, as you can see, is cylindrical versus the trumpet we saw earlier, which is conical. That impacts its tone color as well as the type of metal. This uses a brass resonator, this uses tin and lead, as well as the type of reed and shallot on the inside. Okay, so before we go upstairs to more of the positive and swell and things like that, I want to show you a very secret little passageway here. We're in the choir and we're going to come around this corner to a very precariously balanced walkboard on which we'll see the very tallest pipes in the whole organ. Come with me. So here we are in our secret little part of the pedal division. Remember, most of the pedal is downstairs below my feet, but one very special rank of pipes, the violon, is to my right. That's our stringy pedal stop. Sounds a little bit more like a buzzy string bass section. To my left, however, are the 32-foot bombard pipes, the largest pipes in the organ. They go all the way up to the ceiling, and they're super large. Okay, and then they continue all the way down to the floor where we were before. And these pipes speak out through an opening above the St. John's altar behind my head. Okay, so very quick shot before I lose my balance. I'm on the ladder now, you're in the choir division, and we're heading upstairs to the positive through this door here. Follow me. So here we are in the positive division. This is my favorite division to visit in the whole organ because it feels like a treehouse. If you look over here to my left, this is the fancy metalwork that you see when you're taking communion maybe, and down there is the chancel. So I feel like I could set up a lawn chair up here and enjoy Mass from a neat vantage point. Anyway, I digress. This is the positive division. This is a very special division for this organ. It was one of the things that G. Donald Harrison brought to Aeolian-Skinner when he came. And he was transitioning the company away from more symphonic organs that are trying to represent very literally the sound of an orchestra to organs that harken back to something older and use more principal foundation pipes to mimic various unique colors that kind of sound like an orchestra but really sound unique to the organ. And this is a shining example of that. The positive is also home to lots of very small pipes because if you remember the organ builds various harmonics. So where a clarinet, they're not playing all the various harmonics in their profile. The organ can literally play those and basically create like a mega harmonic. And that's how we create various colors and sounds. This is also a great place to show you the various shapes of pipes. Let's start in the back here with our 8-foot gedeckt. These little pipes all have chimneys on them. Sometimes this is called the chimney flute, and so there's this little hole in the top and it looks like he's wearing a very funny hat. The shape and size of this chimney also affects the sound of this pipe. Of course, right by me here are these little teeny tiny pipes, which you have to be very careful with. See, this poor guy's already been through the ringer, it's already been bent, but this is a high note on that 1-foot pipe. Look at the little pipe mouth there, it's so cute. I love these. This is our koppel flute, and boy, what a funny hat this guy has. So this is another big flute, and this cone creates another unique timbre. Behind me is the upper grate and swell, and that's where we're going next. But on the way, I want to show you one of the best stops on the whole organ. It's right here above my head. If you can see, these are big wooden pipes, and they are of the 16-foot Subas from the pedal. Now you might say, Brian, you're crazy. The pedal organ is all the way downstairs, and we're 2 stories up. But Harrison decided that they should be here, and they work beautifully. Almost every organ built with a 16-foot rank has a Subas. It's a type of flute. It has a lot of fundamentals, so it kind of sounds like a universal bass sound. This is truly a universal stop. It makes a positive impact with the quietest stops of the organ, and it also makes an impact with full organ on. It's absolutely amazing, so I want to show it to you. Okay, so let's head into the upper swell first. Follow me through this door. So here we are in the upper swell, and this part of the swell contains some of our mixture pipes. It also contains the 8 and 4-foot French reeds, and these reeds are brighters. I want to make special note of these wooden flutes you see here. Notice that they're in the shape of a triangle. It's a very unique Skinner stop, something G. Donald Harrison took with him from Mr. Ernest Skinner, and they create a sort of haunting, very unique timbre. On the very back wall are the 16-foot pipes of the swell. And you see that we don't actually have 16 feet of clearance in here. So these pipes had to be what's called mitered. They're curved, and they look kind of funny because of that, but that's the only way you can fit them in here. Luckily for us, if you miter them right, it doesn't really have much impact on the sound quality, and you can fit big pipes in smaller places. So now we're on the other side of the swell shades, and we're in the upper grate. The upper grate has a bunch of the higher pipes, and right by my knee is one of our many mixtures on this organ. And I keep using that word, and now we're finally going to tell you what it means. A mixture pipe is kind of like what it sounds, a mix of different pipes playing at the same time. So when I play one note downstairs on the console, and I have this mixture stop selected, it will play these 3 pipes at once. So that the effect is something of like a uniform reinforcement of the harmonics across the whole keyboard, or compass of the keyboard. And these mixtures are what create this signature organ sound. So if you draw principals and mixtures, you're going to get what's called a plenum, and that's going to sound like all the classic organ synth sounds that you've heard in the movies. Other pipes on the upper grade include the 2-foot principals. The 4-foot principal is up here as well. And then if you look out here, you can peek through and see just how high we are. Those are the panels on the ceiling of the chancel. So now we're going to go upstairs and go even higher into the ceiling. So come on with me up this very scary rickety ladder. So here we are in the string division. This is all the way up in the ceiling. To my left are the swell shades for this. There's the fabric panel where the sound comes out and goes down into the ceiling of the chancel below. This division was built by the Wanamaker Pipe Shop just down the road at Macy's, which has the largest functioning organ in the world, by the way. This was Rodman Wanamaker's church, and luckily G. Donald Harrison is a great musician. He wasn't going to scrap all this. So we have a very unique situation at St. Mark's where we have very sturdy, tall, vertical choruses, which are Harrison's signature, but we also have a lot of these beautiful symphonic stops that are left over from the Wanamaker Pipe Shop. And I just want to put a word in there. The Wanamaker Pipe Shop constructed this division, but the pipework is from W. Kimball, which is one of the most underrated builders around. They built some truly amazing instruments, and they're the ones who are responsible for that amazing Wanamaker string sound. So right in front of me now are the various string pipes of the organ. and each of them has a mate that's a celeste, and the celestes of the organ are tuned slightly sharp or flat of its partner. And so what it creates is an undulation between the two ranks that sounds together like a big string orchestra. And so if you can imagine that multiplied by a whole bunch as you do up here, you have this really magnificent sound of strings. To my right is probably the loudest stop in the front organ, and that's the tuba. Behind me are a few of the interesting color stops of this division. This one here is an English horn, and this is a very funny looking stop. It looks like a silly hat, but this is a reed pipe, just like the ones downstairs that we looked at. Behind the English horn are the French horn stops. This is a very, very special Aeolian-Skinner stop, Harrison's predecessor. You'll notice that it looks kind of like a trumpet, but it's actually a wider cone and it's capped. And that, plus some very clever voicing on the reed, makes it sound almost like a French horn in the orchestra. I want to briefly show you one of our flauto mirabilis stops, which is also here on the ceiling. On the front, it looks like your average wooden flute, but on the back, you see these holes drilled, and that means that this flute is harmonic, which creates a wonderful thrilling sound. And this pipe has enough air to overblow, so it's actually blowing so much that it sounds an octave higher than it looks. It's kind of like the opposite of a stopped flute. As we move to the other side of the string organ, I also want to show you some quirky things that have been hung on the wall over the years. This random painting, and then a stuffed moose head. It's before my time. I don't know why it's there, but I'm sure somebody does. This is the Vox Humana. It's another reed, and it has a capped resonator. It also has a hole in the side, and that's where the air escapes. So this stop was invented, supposedly, it's called the Vox Humana, so that it sounds like the human voice. I can tell you, no good singer I know sounds like that stop. But it does sound like a funny sounding choir when it's distant enough, and it's been around long enough that it's essentially become a special effect for the organ. One of the secrets is, with strings like this, with a good enough string division, you can add in the Vox Humana to add a little bit of extra spice and flavor to your string ensemble. So now that we've seen most of the front organ, let's take a trip on back to see the antiphonal organ, which is where we'll close out our tour for today. Follow me. So here we are in the antiphonal organ, and this is all one division, even though there are two towers. On the other side of me are the hautbois and the borden. The hautbois is actually the only oboe on this whole organ. And this side are all the principals, and these help reinforce whatever sound is coming out of the front organ. All right, so for our very last stop on our tour today, we'll take a look at the trumpet en chamade. Behind me is the rest of the church, and this trumpet stop right here speaks directly out into the church. It's the thrilling trumpet stop that you hear at the end of all your favorite hymns, voluntaries, things like that. And I'll tell you something, this trumpet en chamade, kind of like the soubbasse in its own way, is one of the most effective stops in the organ, I think. It's amazing. It was installed in 2002. It's from AR Shops, and it's incredible. It can be used for chords, and it sounds beautiful, and it can also be this, triumphant, super loud sound above the full organ. Thank you very much for joining us on our tour today of the organ. I know there's a lot there to unpack, and frankly, it's a whole rabbit hole, organ design and construction. We could spend hours and hours and hours talking about it. But this is just an overview of what's behind the curtain, as it were, behind the facade of the organ. So next time you're here listening to some music, you can imagine all the little parts and pieces and pipes that are singing away behind the scenes, helping us create something that's hopefully rather moving. I look forward to seeing you in church. Thanks.